everybody to our first academic advising seminar. It's a series of 6 workshops. Today we're going to have Christine Vonder Harr share with us some great ways to correspond with your student from a number of different venues. I want to remind you that we do have an October session also. You can find that information out by going online to the Academic Advising Guide. Click on Faculty, and then there's Professional Development. Brochure is there. So October 25th, our next session will be Student Services and Preparing Students for Registration. Julie Rudolph and Mike Ropley will be talking about different ways to help your students prepare for when they meet with you, but also some support services that are available for students also. As a part of earning PDI money, Professional Development Incentive money, there will be a deliverable at the end of the session that Christine will talk to you about. So if you want to do this, it's called homework in other terms. So sometimes you don't think you're always going to get homework from a workshop, but it does help you with application of the knowledge you're going to learn today. Without any further ado, I'm going to tell you about Christine. Christine's been at the university about 20 years, I think.
Going on 25.
25,
altogether.
Okay. I guess it's better to go short than long in somebody's tenure here. Christine works in the Department of Language and Literature in the College of Arts and Sciences. She works with 2 populations of students. She works with the English majors and then the English education students over in the College of Education and Human Services. So she's worked with a broad audience of students, and that cross-cultural pollination coming from 2 colleges gives you some different perspective also. Christine was our 2012 Outstanding Academic Advisor, so she's well poised to be able to present this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Deb. And that last little bit about the award, it was certainly a humbling honor and recognition, but it's always nice to hear that the work that you're doing and that you love is recognized and appreciated by your peers and by the advising staff and counselors at Ferris. And just to add to a couple of housekeeping items, I hope to keep this informal, that we can have some discussion among ourselves. The basis of my teaching is inquiry. The basis of my advising is inquiries, and so it's questions and answers. So I have questions and my own answers prepared, but I'm hoping that I can also get some input from you and some suggestions from you, because I am here to learn as well. One of the things that I've learned in 25 years of teaching at Ferris is that the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And I try to pass that on to students. There's no stopping point for learning, and of course that's one of our goals at Ferris. Part of our mission is lifelong learning. So I have on the screen just one of my favorite writers. I'm an English teacher by trade and by degrees and preparation, and I just like this a lot. I just think that you know, it's not so much what we say, it's what we model, it's what we inspire in our advisees and in our students. And so you have, I'm going to follow on the slides here, it pretty much follows the handout you have, the stapled packet. So I hope you'll follow that first page with me, and you'll see that most of the items on there are questions. So those first 2 categories, headers on there, deal with communication context, and I just sort of want to get a sense of your responses to these questions. My goal here today is to, from a practical side, to give you some models of letter writing. One of the most difficult things I find about advising is getting my advisees to be responsive in a timely manner. I've done some very informal research among advisees and found that they have the same answer about us as advisors. They want us to get back to them in a timely way. But that whole idea of communication, and one of the things that is most important in part of my advising is that communication aspect with students. The most effective for me is one-on-one oral communication with them. So many of the letter samples that you have as models in those packets are preceded by conference, face-to-face kinds of communications, but also phone calls. So I do a lot of phone calling as well as part of my advising. I do need to tell you that my advising experience has been both as a faculty member and as a program coordinator. Deb mentioned that I'm currently working with the College of Education in the content area of English as program coordinator for English education out of the College of Arts and Sciences. But for 3 years prior to the most recent, these past 2 years as English ed coordinator, I was the program coordinator of the newly invigorated Bachelor of Integrative Studies program, which was probably the most intensive and demanding advising I've ever done, because if you know anything about that program, every student has an individualized program, so that there's no set curriculum per se other than general education. So that has been a learning experience, and some of what I'll share with you today may incorporate that as much. So I'm going to go ahead just with our first set of questions here. And what I'd like you to do is just for a minute, in whatever roles you're in, I know I walked around and introduced myself to you all. I don't think I met everybody. But what I would like to do is, from your perspective as an advisor, either as a direct role as advisor or indirect role, and I think in some way we're all indirect or direct advisors of our students. We all have our role in that. So the questions, just to start with, are two open questions. Practical challenges in advising students. What are some practical challenges that we face as advisors? And what are some of the reasons for those practical gaps, or for those communication gaps, rather? So could I ask you just somewhere in your sheet, just very briefly for a minute, to jot down your just sort of gut reactions, or from your experience, what would you identify as one or two practical challenges for advisors? And what do you see as accounting for some of the communication gaps that we might have? So what might you identify then for the first question as a challenge? I could have used the word problems, difficulty, and maybe more severe words, but maybe the more positive connotation of challenges. So either for you personally or in your direct experience as an advisor, or from situations you know, what would you identify as a challenge? Yes?
Students don't get back to you?
Students don't get back to you. And you may have many, many different efforts to try to contact them and have them get to you and respond to you. That's one challenge. Another? Yes?
Their timeline is usually, I need it tomorrow, or I needed it yesterday.
So that timely manner, but they're not necessarily considering your time schedule and the time you may need to prepare something for them. Mm-hmm.
Their emergency.
Their emergency, right? Mm-hmm. Suddenly becomes your problem. Exactly. Challenge, right?
Okay.
Another one.
Just the overall of them taking ownership of their college career.
It's a big one, to take ownership of the college career. And I think that points to the idea of educating students right from the start. And where are they getting that education for doing that? And we have lots of venues and lots of people and resources at Ferris for doing that. But certainly advising, the one-on-one advising, and also the counseling can be a huge part of that. Any other challenges anybody thought of? Yes?
Our own time and maintaining priorities with the willingness to probably send out the emails and letters, managing our own time.
Making your own time, scheduling time, figuring that into part of our, I know we talked in your faculty, so we all have our full-time positions and duties and responsibilities as primary, but we also have our important functions as taking care of our advisees, right? You just pointed out the challenge of our making time and building that into the schedule to do an effective job. One more challenge?
Overabundance of communication.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the students have so much coming in regards to communication. They're not sure what all they need to read. Thus, sometimes they don't read our communication or read it completely to communicate back to us.
Exactly, and especially if email is our main form of communication and the numbers of emails, and that's when those subject lines become really, really important. Thinking of dramatic ways to catch their attention and have them open those. And sometimes putting most of the message right in the subject line. Very much like many of us, I know I do, respond to the university-wide notices. When you have to go through those every day, and you don't have time to necessarily read every one you open up or even open up every one, those subject lines become really important. Well, I think we've implied some reasons for the gap. And even outright stated some, but can you think of reasons for the gaps in communication, either from the advisor side or the advisee side?
I think students don't realize the importance. They say, I met with you last semester, I don't have to meet with you again, ever. Once is enough.
I ran into 2 students this past year who were new to me. And they told me they were internal transfers, so sometimes that becomes a problem if they transfer programs in their mind. They've transferred programs because they've looked it up on the catalog, but they haven't told anyone, they haven't met with anyone. And one of the students told me, well, I've been self-advising. It sounds like self-medicating. I've been self-advising for a year, and she's, paying some of the cost of that in time in courses that may not be as relevant to her program in the priority courses. So that definitely becomes a problem and also a reason for the communication gap. Any from the faculty or advisor side, advising side, from our side? A reason for the gap?
One of the problems we have with School of Ed, and we run into it with you, with Jerome. Our students have advisors from School of Ed, plus they have advisors for their content areas, their majors and their minors. So most of our students have 3 advisors, and they don't always see the need to see all 3 of them every semester. And some of them are really good at seeing us in School of Ed, but then don't talk to their content advisors, or vice versa. They know everything about their majors and minors, but not their professional sequence. So being able to balance it out, because a lot of times, just like us being able to find the time to meet with them making 3 different appointments can be very time consuming for them.
And that's certainly something that we need to work on, I think, especially where you have dual programs, or when you talk about putting the minor in there and having 3 different advising persons to contact or to meet up with. That is a lot of time on the part of the student. And so maybe that is something, another workshop or another conversation and dialogue that departments and programs could have for cooperation and for all for the student, right? It's all for the student and their success. So what I'd like to talk about is really one way to overcome the gap that I've found successful, and it's really something I discovered just by looking through old emails, and it's something I do, but I didn't realize I did it systematically and that it was having some positive impact on students. And so what I am sharing with you today are a series, just a sampling of the kind of letters. Most of these go by emails, but some of them do go by hard copy and by email for the students' files. In a more formal way, a signed letter. So I think that we can all pretty easily come up with some traditional forms of communication. We've mentioned a couple already. Want to just throw some out, traditional forms of communication with advisees? You also have these questions on the first page, which is an outline as well. So traditional forms of communication. So we talked about conferencing with students, inviting them to meet you, set up appointments in your offices or your program areas, things like phone calls, that sort of thing. So face-to-face meetings and conferences probably being the most, telephone conferences, probably I learned to transfer to my local students from the experiences I had with the Bachelor of Integrative Studies, where 2/3 of the students were regional around the state and even around the country, and therefore telephone conferences were the only ways. And especially in situations where we now have more and more online classes, students are mixed delivery, where students are not always on campus. And so we need that kind of, I find I need that kind of situation as well. Telephone conferences. Letters and correspondence via email is probably the most common, I'm going to guess. Snail mail, I think, went the way of, I don't know where, ever since Ferris went fully email and electronic some years ago. Are there any other traditional ways that perhaps I'm not covering or thinking of?
Discussions in class.
Discussions in class.
If they're your students, it's easy enough to say, come see me.
If they're right in class, if you have other venues and areas where you can meet them outside of class, in class. Sometimes I know, especially with freshmen, I find myself in the English 150 introductory writing class to remind them that it's registration time coming up. I might even put my FSU sites on the screen for them to remind them where they can find that. So we can all help each other out, other than just the one-on-one kinds of things as well. Some more recent ways, and somebody already expressed this in terms of reaching students in ways that they may be more familiar with than some of us. And you talked about the bombardment of forms of communication that the students have. And what's the one they go to most frequently? Students. Facebook is just, that's just without question. They're on Facebook. And it's one of the reasons I, along with the English Ed Committee in our department, created our own, well, last year we created our own Facebook page finally to do that. Anybody here use a Facebook page to communicate with students? Okay. So it's more and more. There are the dangers of Facebook and, you know, some of the drawbacks of Facebook, but it is a place where they do go first. And if you're one of their groups, last year we had a panel presentation, and it was a professional development for English Ed majors and minors, and Facebook was the way we got the greatest number there. So, and then they spread the word and tell their friends because there's all that connection, so it appears on walls, and it spreads geometrically that way. So that's been a great help. I have not used a lot of these things, but I am looking to educate myself. I've been a teacher for 40 years now altogether, 25 of those at Ferris, and it's one of the things that has to keep people like me going. So this is something for me that's relatively new, and it seems like it's exploded in the last 5 to 10 years especially. And there are a lot of faculty, I would say, in my, quote, academic generation here at Ferris that may not even be using email to contact their students. They may be using still some old-fashioned ways, like phone calls and that. And so I think it behooves us to consider new ways to contact and communicate with them. But I want to also talk about and have us think about these forms of communication, especially by letter writing and in the form of email. You know, the pipeline would be email, but there's still the traditional letters. And as I mentioned before, many of these are preceded by phone calls as well. So I think what I'd like to emphasize is the personal contact. Many students say they don't want to come to their advisor. Somebody mentioned already that getting students to come even when you've had multiple emails or even phone calls. I had a student last year that no matter what I did, I couldn't get in touch with him. I know he got my emails. I know he got some of my phone conversations, and I also know that he got intervention through other people, but he never came to me. And so I finally just hunted him down in a class one day. And I wasn't stalking him, I promise. What I was doing was I checked his schedule as his advisor, and I met with him, and he talked to me about just his fear of approaching an advisor. And I don't know, he didn't reveal if he had had a previous experience at another school, another time, another place, but he was very, very nervous about meeting me. And so when I talked to him just informally in the hallway, that seemed to break the ice, and now I can't get him to stop seeing me. So, it's all good. So sometimes it is that extra step, and I find it mostly with freshmen and sophomores. I don't know if that's the case with most of you, but I think that is another way to have that, to have, first of all, the passion to know that the students might need some intervention. I have heard colleagues, advisors say things like, I sent it out, now it's up to them. And that ties in with our notion of they need to take responsibility for their own education. So, but how do we begin to educate them about that if we don't have a chance to see them? So it's kind of a catch-22. And for me, I try to be the bigger person. That might be not the best way to say that, but the person, I'm the faculty mentor and advisor. I'm the person who should step up and intervene, thinking things like this student who's fearful, this student who's maybe just for some reason isn't connecting the dots or isn't making the kinds of cause and effect relationships about the courses they're taking. This came home to me when a nephew of mine started community college in Missouri. And he had been so used to, you know this term we talk about, helicopter parents? He had been so used to his parents taking care of everything for him that when he got here, it was habit. I think he knew it here, that wasn't happening anymore. But as far as deadlines and all the different things that he had to function to take care of, he let it slide. So that's where I will do the intervention, especially by these kinds of outreaches, okay? Just generally speaking, I want you to think about the kinds of written communication, and mostly I'd like us to think about the content, but also the tone of those communication letters that we have. I've seen all kinds of communications over the years. As program coordinator, I sometimes get copied on the communications going back and forth between the faculty advisors that I've worked with assigning to the students for the content area of English. And what I often find is the letters the notes and the emails they're very abrupt, they're impersonal. They may be a form letter that's not personalized. There have been a couple that have actually shocked me because of, looking at them, reading with the mind of a student. I think I would be scared to go see the advisors. And talking to the advisors, they did not intend that at all. So there's a disconnect when we talk about what might cause some of those gaps. It might be the attitude of, they're adults now, they should take care of their own education. I agree with that. Okay, but I also think there has to be some mentoring and some support systems balanced with that. So that's that really important step of having that kind of contact. And let me stop to see if anyone has any comment they want to add. Maybe you've had similar experiences. Maybe you've had faculty that you work with, or you yourself have colleagues that have demonstrated positive or maybe not so positive behavior, whether intentionally or not, with students.
Time advising comes around, even for our freshmen, in the next week or so here, all their advising holds will go on for registration. And the new ones coming in, I've run into those freshmen that first semester isn't going so well, and they're afraid to admit it to us.
Mm-hmm.
Not realizing that our role is to help them get through and to give them resources to make it better. And I don't know how we communicate that to them, that we're not there to judge them,
Mm-hmm.
we're there to be their support.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about making sure that those subject lines pop so that they read them. Have you found something that works?
I have not found that magical headline yet.
Please repeat that, Jen.
Sure. The question had to do with getting the, well, the last question had to do with the subject line of these emails sent to advisees to get them to come, whether it's interventive or a regular appointment for advising. And the question was, have I come across or come up with any such subject lines that pop? And my first answer was, I haven't found that magical one yet. But I do find that if you mention food in it, sometimes that helps. They know that I have candy in my office or something like that. But those are just the little tease lines. But sometimes deadlines will help. I think sometimes I'll look up their registration start date for the individual student, and I will put that in the subject line. A question like, did you know and I might even put their name right in it. So when they see it, it's like,
They know
Chris,
it's for them. And
Chris,
not general.
are you aware your registration start date is March 21st? And they may or may not open it, and I may say something like, well, there's the lifting of the hold, which can also be an incentive to come see you, because they know they can't go anywhere without that. So I don't know how many of you work with programs where there is an academic hold or an advising hold on the student's program. That we know that sometimes becomes a problem when you have 3 different advisors in 3 different programs for the same student, and who gets to lift that hold. But I think that's the same kind of cooperation. But a student knows that they have to start. And one of the things that I've noticed about, talk about cooperation, for example, in the College of Arts and Sciences, the 8 or 9 program coordinators for the content areas for education have all discussed the same problem that we have. And one of those is that they don't go see their advisors for the minor. So we've talked about, okay, when the students come to you for your major, find out right then and there, or talk to them about when they last saw their advisor for their minor. So that's just one area of advising, but it is a way. We are kind of pushing each other's advisees to go see our colleagues who work with the minor. So that's a long way around your question about the subject line, but I think really what we're talking about is general incentives to get our advisees to come see us. If it's not coming to see us, I have worked with several students just on the telephone, because it's just so difficult for them to come see me, or sometimes our schedules are so different. And when they realize that they can have a good conversation by Skype or by FaceTime or by good old-fashioned telephone line, that will be something that's an alternative. So sometimes we need to think of convenience, not just for ourselves, but also for our advisees, and offer them multiple kinds of times. For example, if an advisor is inflexible about when to see you, see him or her, I have office hours on Monday and Wednesday from 12 till 2, and if you can't make it, you need to make it. And to me, that's unreasonable, because not everybody has your schedule. What about the students who have that class every Monday and Wednesday, the exact same times as your office hours? I don't think most are like that, but I have come across people like that. And that's the kind of thing that will shut down students if that's their first experience. They're gonna generalize that, and that becomes their way of thinking, especially as first-year students who are already, many of them, very nervous about seeing an advisor. What I'd like to do in the time left, and I don't know that we're going to need all this time, but I feel like I would be happy to stay here and answer questions and talk to you about the different kinds of other materials that I could provide for you. I just have a sampling of letters in there. And I know when I met with Deb this summer about doing this presentation with you and providing the materials for you, she had shown me a handbook used by, I forget what
It was Arts
department.
and Sciences, back when we did semester transition, which Chris and I may be the only ones here that went through semester conversion when we moved from quarters to semesters. But there was a whole series of letters that was created at that time. And I often thought about the value of doing something like that again, because if you have a go-to letter that you can adopt for your program, your college, whatever the situation. How easy is that instead of having to try and think of everything? Easier to modify. So Chris was gracious enough to assist with that.
And as I said, when I started looking through emails, I knew I had written lots of letters to students over the years, and I have some that service templates. I always look for that for myself to modify it. Some of you may do that. I sometimes do that, at least the template for reference letters that have the same format, and then I'm not talking about the same content because I absolutely individualize those student letters. But I think as much as you can individualize your communication with your advisees, with your students, that's a good thing as well. One of the questions that, several of the questions that have come up have to do with that motivating of students and getting them to be in touch with us. Communication is a two-way street, and we can reach out as much as we want and be as kind and as energetic and clever and find ways to pop as we can. We can offer candy or whatever else. But if they don't respond, then there's more than a gap. There's a shortcoming on our part as advisors. And I do see this first in the series of workshops sponsored by Academic Affairs and by the Career Counseling Center, Academic Counseling Center, as really tied very, very keenly to retention. I have seen that in my own program. And I think that it's really important for you to set your own goals as an individual advisor or an area advisor or a program advisor, whatever your particular position and role is at Ferris. So I think that you, first of all, being here today shows your commitment and your own passion to what you do and working with our students in different ways. And for me, that kind of work drives really actually my teaching as well. To know that there are students that are whole persons outside of our individual subject areas, and they have lives and passions and dreams and goals. And so I think a really important thing that I've learned, both as a faculty advisor, as a classroom teacher, and as a program coordinator, is the individual initial contact is absolutely crucial. I think that's why Ferris spends so much time, we spend so much time in the orientation process, in the dog days, in our first impressions. And so I think when we think of ourselves in those roles as their first stopping point, and especially if you work with faculty advisors. I was speaking with Sharon, right? Is it Sharon? Sharon, while we were had a break, and as a educational counselor in the College of Business, and many of you in your roles work with faculty in assigning advising duties and making those matches, and then trying to educate and inspire and motivate those faculty and those others who work on a regular basis with assigned advisees. And so for me, one of the things that I found in all levels of my advising is that very first contact. And I want to make it special. Sharon brought up the problem of sometimes when faculty or advisors, counselors, whoever it may be, set really limited hours, say for example, office hours, and say just come by sometime. In other words, her point was about not setting up a specific time with an individual advisor, but just saying come during my office hours, where you get the line up outside the office, there's a time crunch, etc. And how do you inspire or talk to those faculty? And my response to Sharon was, I can't do it for my whole department and my colleagues. I don't, number one, have that role, but in my little role as English education program coordinator, I work with a committee. I told her I work to get people on that committee, invite people to run for that committee in our department who, number one, have a passion for teaching because it's education, English education. Secondly, who are for students in visible and energetic ways, and who are committed to lifelong learning. They themselves are passionate about doing new things and exploring things and working with students. So kind of stacking the deck to make the system work. And then working with those faculty as advisors who now ask for advisees. who identify students they'd like to work with, or students identify them. And it's very exciting to see that. It's very positive. But when those students first come to see me when they enter the program, so they're accepted into the College of Ed, into the English Ed program, and they've met with advisors in education, and they've had their orientation, and now they come to me to learn about their English content area. And the first question I ask them is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And where is your passion? And I look for the passion. And I begin to educate them a little bit about their own chosen subject matter. Because talk about retention, if they don't know what their own program and their own career is, this is a problem. All right, and a lot of times I will get the answer, it was my best subject in high school, or I had my favorite teacher, and it was an English teacher. And sometimes that was their favorite teacher, but they end up in math or biology, or a subject so it was the teacher that inspired them in the education role, but the subject matter was not their strength, and it was never going to be their teaching passion, but math or biology. So you discover those things early on. So I think that inquiry approach to interviewing and asking those umbrella questions, those framework questions that will inspire the student, or it's a win-win situation. If it turns out that they think about it and determine that maybe I need to know more about this field and what its intention is. And as a result, we've also built into our Gateway course for English students, both BAs and the BS in education, an introductory course, a Gateway class where we deal with the subjects of English and what it means to be an English major. So there's a lot of education besides just registering people for classes, because that's the thing that has to get done. That's the deadline window, right? But what about the big picture? So if we're talking about advising in terms of retention, I think it's very, very, very important for the advisors, and this is not my job here today and not what I planned for today, but I do think it serves the context and framework for what I'm talking about in the letters that are provided, the concrete kinds of materials. So just to encourage you, if you have that influence either individually or with faculty, to make it a point to talk about that passion for their own chosen careers and their subject matter in those fields. And I think once faculty understand that, it's a very, very important aspect to an incoming, a starting freshman, and someone new to the program. I want to take a look at the letters in the time we have left. The item that's on the screen right now is what we're going to end with. So there's nothing else on the screen that I want you to look at. I would like you to look at the letters I provided, and I want to walk you through them. Give you a chance to skim over them, and also to let you know that if there's any way that I can help you with any kind of correspondence, my doctoral degree is in writing and rhetoric, so it's what I do. And I feel very, very vulnerable here because I'm passing out writing, and I have writing on the screen, and there's nothing worse than an English teacher who has an error in a document or in a public display of information. So, and also the kind of writing that I do, I'm told by some of my colleagues and some of the recipients of my writing that I tend to be a little bit wordy. And so I think some of these things can be cut down even further, but again, it's your adaptation. If you find these useful, I'm very happy to share them with you. If you look on page 2, it's the first of the letters, and I've kind of grouped these. The first couple of letters are welcome letters, and I call them letters, but the media by which I send these are emails. Students, when I ran was the program coordinator for the Bachelor of Integrative Studies, I also sent a hard copy as program coordinator because that was their entry point. They were accepted into the College of Arts and Sciences and then into this program, and so I sent a hard copy letter for their files or for their for their records. It's just very nice to get a personalized letter in the mail, and that's all there is to it. I like it. I think most people do like it, and it also does become part of their professional file and their college experience documented. So the first one, I actually have 3 letters of welcome, and I know I have more versions of these, but I thought I'd share these 3 to show you how they're different. So the first one is an individual letter to welcome at the start of an academic year, or even I can modify it if it's a mid-year start, for example, a new student to the program. And you see there that it's relatively short. There are some things that pop in it, like the bold in the center there, because that is what I want them to do. That's the action that I want. So something related to that bolded line, would you please email and suggest a good time, day for you to meet between such and such? And I'll give them, sometimes I'll bullet list and say one of the following 3 days and time slots. So so the bullet list will, it pops a little bit more, their eyes are drawn to it, and it's not a locked time period. And I almost always say, if one of these doesn't work, let me know and we'll arrange something. So it is an outreaching to the advisees in another way. And it also is very friendly. It's not about me, it's about you, the advisee. So I try to be friendly, I try to have that tone come through, I try to personalize it. And because this is an individual, you notice I put at the top in parentheses, individual. So I will individualize this. If I know something about this student, if I know what high school he or she is coming from, I might mention that. I'll personalize it in some way. Is this time consuming? Absolutely, it is. But I think especially the time put in the front end, the front loading, is so, so crucial, because once you snag them and they trust you and they appreciate what you're doing, the rest seems to become easier and fall in place. So spending time up front, I think, for me anyway, has been extremely valuable and worthwhile. I'm going to move to the second one, which is similar to that. But one of the things I discovered, and I probably, again, learned this from the Bachelor of Integrative Studies, because they seem to all be transfer or returning students. But it made me hyper-aware of transfer students and the large, and it seems a growing number, especially from community college transitioning to Ferris, that they will transfer to Ferris, and they are new students. And I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I sometimes overlook them or group them in that collection of students who just seem to show up, or, they were new to the program, and okay, you know your way around, and that expectation is false, or that presumption is false. Those students need as much and sometimes more, because many of them feel really out of place, especially non-traditional age students coming to the campus, especially mid-year. That's a hard time to come in January. So what I try to do is write a letter to these students about their transfer status, welcome them to the program, and then remind them of a couple of things. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you is very often these emails might have attachments with them about maybe something that Deb's office sent to me, or that I get from our educational counselor about my FSU, or some instructions, or very often it'll be a link to their program, to some helpful information. So down at the bottom of this email, you'll find a link that should show you the map of Ferris, or I'm just saying different things, but you can do that as well. Anything that will help the student, for example, if you do have a teacher website, okay, or a faculty website, or a program course website, things that maybe extracurricular items that the student might be interested in, especially for those transfer students. On page 4, you have the sample group letter. So very often what I'll do is students I've already met, we've been through that initial interview, the letter, they've been through several registrations, but I welcome them every semester. Not every semester, but every fall to the new academic year. And then somebody who's new to the program mid-year, I will again do that other letter. So every year the student gets, at the start of a year, gets a welcome letter from me, or a welcome email to them. Again, just to highlight the tone of the letter, I mention my department. I try to personalize it by and be friendly by saying things like, I'm happy to have the opportunity to work with you, but also informational, to remind them they're going to have that academic advising hold. And they may hit a wall if they don't know that. So I try to hit that in a number of ways. One of the things I noticed about all these letters when I was looking them up is I have that repetition of that line in every single letter. In the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to contact me. My contact information is at the bottom. So even if they don't contact me, I just say that every single time, and I say it in my conversations and I say it in my conferences with students because I want them to know and feel that they are always welcome and can contact me. The page 5 letter, this is something that I've done recently in working with English education students, but it also derived from my teaching in my classes and having freshmen in my classes. I don't send my students this email, although I've thought about it. So classes like the introductory writing class. So you all know, obviously, about posting midterm grades, and we're encouraged to do that for the lower level classes and for freshmen and sophomore students, especially as an interventive, encouraging sort of thing. This letter I send out to all the English advisees to let them know that, not that I'm watching them, okay, which I am. I mean, I'm watching their progress academically. That's my job. I need to do that. But also as a way to let them know that remind them that they have the support system, remind them that this is the midway mark, and that this is the chance to keep that GPA going, keep it strong, go talk to your teachers. I wanted to mention a study that I tell my students about. In this study, I remember reading the results or the summary of the study, and I want to say it was by the Harvard School of Education, and I should have the data and background on that. But what stood out for me when I read the summary of this article about maybe 12 years ago now, 12 years ago there was a national survey of recent college graduates, undergrads, and they were something like the top 10% of their classes. So they were highly successful. They were defined as highly successful students. And it was determined by a number of factors, but the survey focused on one key question, and that was, what items would you point to account for your academic success? Can you guess what number 1 and number 2 is? And this is what I tell my students, so I'll throw it out to you. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. What do you think would be number 1 and number 2 at the top of that list?
Significant faculty advisor, or significant professor.
Talking to your professors was number 2.
An advisor.
So talking to a professor, talking to an instructor, and it might have been an advisor, but talking to your teachers, talking to my teachers, talking to my instructors. That was number 2. Number 1 was attending class. They attended class.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Number 1 and number 2. And so I've never forgotten that number 2, we try harder, right? That really huge significance that we have, that sometimes we don't know even the rippling effect that it has down the way. I have a niece who works with an organization. She started it called Women's Voices Worldwide. And she is counseling and mentoring women for speaking out and empowering women to speak out. And she told me that one of the common reasons that these women that she's counseling and mentoring at age 50 and 60 and older, and she's 31, by the way, and she feels, what do I have to give to these women? But counseling them, and the commonality, which really surprised her, was the lack of confidence because of something somebody said to them in school, even way back to their grade school or middle school years. That somebody told them they could never be a writer. Somebody told them they spoke terribly, they should just sit down and be quiet. Somebody said something to them in a school setting, and all of them, I believe, were school-related or academic-related. So the power that we have as teachers, as mentors, as faculty members, as advisors, as administrators and staff members, we all work together to have that kind of powerful and hopefully positive impact. So that was a really, really powerful. I want to connect it to one other little anecdote. I think it was the Nessie data from 2 years ago. I don't know if it was 2010 or 2011, but I remember sitting in Allied Health classroom and going through the Nessie data and the summary for Ferris. And one of the things I remember to write down, I can't remember the wording of the question, but I remember the answer. And the wording of the question had to do with our graduates and our seniors, our graduating seniors. And what single factor would you point to for your academic success and time at Ferris? And the number one answer that Robbie Tian told us about was a single faculty member who had an impact, a positive impact as a mentor, as a role model, and not always an advisor or a classroom teacher or a program person, but someone who had reached out to them. And so I think that we have these golden opportunities to do this kind of thing, and if we could inspire our colleagues to do this, because as I said, I think I'm speaking to the choir in the people attending here today. Let me just very quickly point to the last couple of letters with some of those comments and observations in mind. This is a sample letter of congratulations. This, I always thought somebody else did. I just figured that if they got an award from the College of Education, and I'm sure they do, but I never thought to do it myself from the English content side, and especially if it's an English-related award or something that our students in that program have achieved. And so this first one has to do with the outstanding student. That's an annual award, and I make sure that I send a letterhead copy to those students. I don't see any reason why anybody at any level couldn't write such a letter of congratulations. I don't think you have to be an assigned role with release time or pay attached to those kinds of recognitions and kindnesses. And those are the kind of things that our students are going to remember and impact. Success breeds success. Recognizing the success is another motivation for them. On page 7, you have another letter of congratulations, and because I'm a program coordinator, this became very clear to me that I wanted to do this. I had done it occasionally to students I had known before, either as an advisor or as a teacher, sent them a letter or a note, but I do this formally now for all of our graduates that I'm aware of and that I know about. So this one here is a recent grad, and as you see from the letter, I attended the graduation and I saw them walk across the stage, and it was a powerful thing. And I think that, and I get thank you letters sometimes, thank you notes for the thank yous, or the congratulations or whatever. It's a very, very nice thing to have that correspondence going. A similar letter on page 8 is a letter of congratulations, and I don't want to forget, I'm very hyper aware of our regional students, our online students, and our students even outside the state who are enrolled in fully online programs or distance programs as Ferris students. And so the regional site and distance graduates and students as well. When you read those earlier welcome letters, you will also see my reference to statements like, if you are a student at a regional site, if you are in Traverse City, or if you are in Flint, please, and then, specifically address them as well, because they are part of this broad community, and it's become more and more so over the past several years. So the final letter here is a letter for those students, and they do receive a diploma. They very often cannot attend our Big Rapids site graduation, the big commencement, but they have achieved as much as any student who walks across that stage. And so I will grab some extra books and I will send them a commencement exercise program, mail that to them along with this letter. So these are just some of the letters that I send. They're probably the ones that I send most often, frequently, are updates. And I'm beginning to put those updates and information that they need in bullet lists on the Facebook page as well, as long as it's not anything private or things that, well, anything private wouldn't go out in a letter anyway, right? But things that might be professional development opportunities, activities, panels, social things that we have, get-togethers, speakers, lectures that might be relevant for them or useful for them, and conferences and things like that. So all of these kinds of correspondences are pretty important, and I think make a big difference in the lives of our students when we take that kind of time. And just to end with a different quote, but also from one of the writers I admire, poet and speaker, actor extraordinaire. I got the chance to meet Maya Angelou a couple of years ago at a Fulbright Awards ceremony for, of all people, I got to see also Archbishop Tutu, who was receiving the award, and she had a poem for him she read at that awards ceremony in Washington, D.C. And it's really nice to meet your heroes now and then. Those things don't come true too often. But it inspired me even more when I met her. And as you can see, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what I have to say to you today. So thank you for coming. I do want to just point out the PDI for those people interested. And Deb can fill them in. The green sheet that you have, if you're interested in PDI that can accompany this, just 2 small tasks. I think they're pretty straightforward. I think before you write any letters, you ought to be thinking about what your overall goals are for communication. So we started with that. So some reflection time. And rather than a formal rubric with it, I've given you that bullet list that I will use to give you feedback. These are not graded as far as I know, so that's happy news for me. I don't have to have a grading scale here. I don't have to worry about pass-fail. But I would be very happy to give you some feedback, and especially if you have a type of letter that is very different from mine, and you'd just like to get some feedback and maybe some help. And I can work one-on-one with you too if you'd like that. I also have lots of other kinds of letters, and if you feel like you'd like to consult with me or see some other types of letters, just feel free to email me. My information's on the bottom of that first page. And Deb will tell you, just reinforce how you need to submit the 2 tasks. The other is just to draft 2 of your own letters. Something that, and I would really encourage you to draft one that you actually can use and will use. And then I'm happy to review that with you both as an English teacher and as an advisor. Don't be scared. So, Deb?
Well, thank you so much, Christine. I don't know about the rest of you, but Christine really inspired me. Listening to you with all your letters, and it's really something on the shelf that you can pull out or from your computer and continue to send this out, you know, and tweak and adapt to the audience. So it was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to do it.
As far as just a little bit of discussion about the PDI, thanks to Michelle Richardson, who asked the question, am I entitled to PDI money? And so I said, well, let's talk to Todd about that. And Todd's clarification on this was, if you are teaching a freshman seminar course, you would be entitled to the PDI money. So that's a new wrinkle in what we're doing, which is kind of exciting, and I can't wait to tell Shelley Vandepan, because maybe she'll have this onslaught of people who want to teach FSUS, because it really is an additional benefit for you. So in order to qualify for PDI money, I'm going to step away from the camera for just a minute and refer back to our brochure here that details that of the 6 sessions that we're offering this year, you must attend 5 of those. And of those 5 sessions, you must complete 4 deliverables. So we try to give some pretty easy deadlines to turn that information in. So on your green sheet today, it does say October 15th. They aren't graded, but you will get some responses back. And Todd has asked that he would like to have these posted online, our deliverable information. Not identifying you by Lisa wrote this. Maybe you don't want to include your name on those things. But maybe you do. maybe you do. Because we want to move this forward. We want your inspiration from your letters to go on for other people to see. That's a great idea. And it's really about the retention student success, and we're all working together. So we want to be able to post those things, because this is a great opportunity. I think it's going to really boost a lot of the relationships that we develop with our advisees or potential advisees. And so, Christine, you've done a wonderful job today in doing that. So if you have any questions about the PBI money or the process, let me know. You can talk about it now or send me an email. Want to let you know that our October session postcard, we always try to send out a postcard ahead of time. That's going to go in the mail probably by Monday. Also, Christina alluded to the letters being available electronically. If she can get those to me,
I'm going to get them to you today.
we'll have them posted by Monday. We always have to go through Ted Home, as most of you do, to get things online. So I'll send you the link of where that will be. It's the same link that you would have gotten into for the September information if you went online at all, through the advising guide, to the faculty tab, and then to the September session. So we're going to keep everything in the September session that's associated with this. I'm going to give a shout out to catering for coming in at the last minute there. Somehow they missed the reminder email from Lori Daniels. Am I forgetting anything else, anybody?
What's the next date?
October 25th. It will be, Julie, in this room?
No, it's in
110. 110. There's everything except for the October session would be in here, but for October it is flight 110. So, you know, if you get to flight, somebody can direct you if it doesn't look like it's the correct room. And we usually follow a class, so it's available like at quarter to the hour. So that's why you see us scattering here to get set up, because we are following on the tails. Today it was a test that we had to be very quiet. I think I've mentioned everything I wanted to, but again, thank you, Christine, and this was an awesome workshop. Look forward to having you attend other sessions.
Thank you all for the work you do. Thank you.